Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tax Talk Unfiltered. This is season 2, and this is an exciting episode because for the first time, we have a special guest joining us. It's not just us Gelt people on the podcast. And so Julie and I are excited to welcome Katie, and we're going to have Katie introduce herself in a bit. I'm Spencer Carroll, CPA, account executive at Gelt, and I host the podcast. And everyone probably recognizes Julie Suskin, CPA, head of tax here at Gelt. She's joining us once again. And today's episode is maybe seemingly not super tax related, but actually it is. And that's why we want to talk about it, because not every client realizes the relationship between the two. But we want to talk about bookkeeping. It's kind of that unglamorous chore, as a lot of business owners tend to see it, but we don't want you to see it that way because it's very important, and clean, organized books actually play a huge factor in your tax bill, your tax strategy. Garbage in, garbage out, famous saying. The same can be true of your books when it comes to your taxes. So thanks for joining. Before we get too deep into it, Katie, would love to pass it over to you if you wouldn't mind giving us a quick introduction of yourself.
Thanks so much, Spencer. I'm excited to be here. My name's Katie Ellinger. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Prometryx. We're a tech-enabled bookkeeping firm. And for your regular listeners, we have a lot in common with Gelt in terms of our philosophy and how we approach things, so I think it'll feel pretty familiar. But we're exclusively focused on the bookkeeping and financial operations side of helping our clients. So like you said, it goes hand in hand, bookkeeping and tax, and I'm excited to jump into the intersection here and help business owners understand this thing that can feel like a chore, how important it is, and also how it can be made to feel a little easier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you for joining, Katie. And I met Katie a week or two ago, and I was introduced to Prometryx, and we're excited to be partnering with them because, like she said, there's a lot of similarities. They're also tech-enabled. We're a tech-enabled tax firm. And just like they want to focus on their main thing, which is bookkeeping, Gelt likes to focus on our main thing, which is tax filing and tax strategy for our clients. So let's get into it. Katie, I'll start with you because we're going to kind of introduce bookkeeping and how it plays into a business owner's decision-making in taxes. If you had to give us kind of the biggest misconception that you hear from business owners when you have that first conversation with them about keeping their books or outsourcing their books, what would you say that business owners get wrong?
Mm-hmm. I would say probably the biggest misconception is, they might have set up QuickBooks online, connected their banks and credit cards, and they would say, I'm logging in and I'm categorizing transactions every month. I've stayed on top of it. I'm done. My books are good. And I can see why you might think that, because QuickBooks sometimes can be hard to use some of the more advanced features that actually close your books and make sure that everything is wrapped up properly. But they are very important. So the first one that business owners sometimes miss is reconciling. At the end of each month, we want to check all of your bank, credit card, loan statements, etc., and actually look at those source documents and make sure that what you think you have in your bank account is actually there, that these two systems are matching up. And then on top of that, there's a lot of other work that can be done, particularly once we start talking about accrual basis versus cash basis accounting. When it comes to the way that we account for the revenue that you're receiving, the way that we account for the timing of your expenses, that can make a really big difference to understanding your profitability and having books that will actually help you make better decisions for your business. But it's not just a check the box exercise.
Sure. Yeah, that's great. It is a lot more than just categorizing. I talk to clients, and when I bring up bookkeeping, they say, oh yeah, I download all my bank statement transactions into an Excel spreadsheet. I assign it a little category and then I pass it off. And I think sometimes their tax CPAs do them a disservice because we're busy, right? And so when tax time comes and they hand over that spreadsheet, instead of educating a client on like, hey, this is actually leaving some missing pieces that I'm having to just fill in myself, I think sometimes the tax CPAs will just fill in those blanks without clearing it with the business owner, the client, because, well, we got to get it done. And so it does go further than just categorizing. And Julie, kind of pivoting to the tax lens, Is there a common mistake or misconception when clients are giving you their books and the impact that bad bookkeeping can play in their tax outcome?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that introduction, Katie. As you were speaking, it was sort of resonating a lot of the items that you spoke about, and I thought it was a great example you gave. The cash versus accrual. That can make such a significant impact on a client's tax return. For all those that may not be as familiar with these terms, one option, the cash is recognizing revenue now versus accrual is sort of, preempting it before you actually receive it. And you could basically be, putting your income in one year versus another, and it can make a really significant difference. And a lot of the time, business owners don't realize how significant these choices are and how significant these errors can be. So when we get a set of financials that may not look so much like financials and sometimes need a little bit of cleaning up, the first conversation I always have is trying to break that misconception of that your books don't really matter. I first and foremost try and educate the client that, before I even begin to talk about next steps, like first, let's understand the premise. Like, let's understand, without even the tax standpoint, but just as a business owner, wanting to understand your profitability or lack thereof, right? Just having that transparency into your books is so important. And I think when you spell it out like that, sometimes business owners are like, yeah, right, I wasn't really sure, what this rental property was making, or yeah, now that you mention it. So, I think just educating on the sheer importance of it is something that could be kind of mind-blowing for clients. Like, oh yeah, it is really important. And then once we're there, once we've kind of aligned on that, then we can sort of talk, okay, next steps, like what should we actually do?
Yeah, and to maybe make that more concrete, I'll give you an example of a client we're working with now who they had their books cash basis for 2024. They had some big projects. They did a lot of investing in those projects and had a lot of costs. So they looked unprofitable in 2024. 2025 comes, they invoice for all of that. They collect the cash for it. And that makes them look very profitable in 2025. And so first of all, this caused a problem when they were talking with investors because, it's a huge swing from one year to the next. And then even more of an issue for them was that they ended up having a huge tax bill in 2025 and paying $20,000 more than they would have if they had the same method across years of accrual basis, because you can't always offset all of your losses from an earlier year into later years. So having the right tax strategy and planning ahead so that you don't have a surprise tax bill one year because you were trying to do something more simple this year, it can have a really big impact.
Yeah, sure. That's a great example. Thank you.
Yeah. Katie, is there a situation, because I hear this a lot when I'm talking to clients and they say, oh, my business is super simple or my books are really easy. Is there an example that you can think of where truly a client's books are so easy that they could do the Excel spreadsheet? Or do you feel like everyone could benefit from professional bookkeeping?
That's a good question. I think everyone eventually will benefit from it. There might be some firms, if you're an individual consultant and it's just you don't have payroll to account for, you don't have 10 different credit cards and bank accounts and loans. There are some, if you trust yourself to really stay on top of it and you'll actually be categorizing and reconciling and doing these activities on a regular basis, I don't think there's anything in that situation that's too complicated or too hard to learn. But the question at that point is more about, is that a good use of your time? And for many people, even if they have pretty simple books and they are able to do it well themselves, they should be focusing on other things.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, sometimes your tax strategy can complicate your business than your bookkeeping. Because I also talk to a lot of clients who their business is growing and it's simple, but in order to save them some money on their taxes, we think about entity election and changing their entity. And with that, it can require more complexity within their business. You mentioned if they don't have payroll, they're not having to reconcile payroll, they're not having to pay anybody. So that makes their books easier. but simply making an entity election for your taxes can introduce payroll, even if it's just you. Julie, maybe you can touch on this, some of the strategies where it'll either complicate your bookkeeping, like I just mentioned, making the entity election, or if somebody doesn't have clean, accurate books, it can make pursuing a certain tax strategy hard to do, if not impossible.
Yeah, sure. No, I think the example that you shared is certainly one that we see so often here. Of a sole proprietor, Katie, as you mentioned, someone that could initially start off as not so simple, could be their assets are very low. They don't rent an office, they work from home. Everything may look quite straightforward. And then, you're at a certain profitable threshold where you decide that, pursuing an S-Corp election makes sense for you. And you can refer to one of our previous podcast episodes for more information on that. And at that point, one of the requirements is a reasonable salary. And that's when it could start to throw people for a loop, because you have so many more additional expenses and items that you didn't have before. Payroll, 401k contributions, perhaps running your health insurance through your W-2 and making sure that that's all recorded properly on your book. So it suddenly brings you from that, simple kind of amateur, bookkeeping project, so to speak, to something that really does require a little bit more, hands-on focus, and it not even necessarily a certain election you could take, but we get clients all the time that are very, well-versed in the real estate world, and they come to us as owners of multiple properties. And sometimes we get it's so difficult to understand which properties are profitable, which ones are in a loss position. There's certain tax strategies that you can take on real estate, and we have a hard time knowing which properties can benefit from what, just based on what we're seeing. So it can be really hard. It can be really hard to guide a client properly. And sometimes we can really be stuck until they're able to really clean things up. So it impacts tax strategies really across the board, not even just from an election standpoint, but truly anyone that has a growing business and whatever it is they're doing, it's so important to have those clean books from the get-go.
Yeah, for sure. And we've definitely seen a lot of examples where it wasn't, and it costs the client literally with their tax strategy. So it's the foundation. If you don't have a solid foundation, then the house can't stand. Same thing with the bookkeeping and your taxes. So, Katie, we mentioned earlier in the episode that there's a lot of similarity between Gelt and Prometryx, the big one being that we are very tech forward. We like to use technology to our advantage and make our offerings better, the team that's providing the offering better. If someone is looking for a bookkeeper for their business, what's something they should look for in a potential bookkeeping partner, and maybe a red flag that they should see as marketing or scary and may not provide the end results that they're looking for?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say there are a few different things that can be green flags or red flags. And in terms of the basics, certainly you need a bookkeeper who's going to close your books within 10 business days every single month. You'd be surprised how many bookkeepers, if they're still doing things in a really manual way, they might not be able to keep up with that. And that's where being tech-enabled and using the tools that are at our disposal to do things more efficiently, faster, more accurately, and doing it throughout the month, not waiting for that work to pile up and have to be done manually at the end of the month, can really set apart how useful those books are. In terms of things that are red flags beyond that, I would say, first of all, understanding where your data is going to live and where it will be kept. We've built our platform on top of QuickBooks Online because that way the data is always there in QuickBooks. And if you need to share it with your accountant, for example, it's very easy to either have them get access to your QuickBooks or send reports over. Bookkeepers who are tech-enabled but use their own custom platforms and don't have that sort of trusted foundation within a system like QuickBooks, you could end up being locked in with your data, then being difficult to export, difficult to change platforms, and difficult to work outside of that ecosystem. The second thing I would say is that you should work with a bookkeeper who's familiar with your industry. This is particularly important for e-commerce and CPG companies, where you might have 15 different sales channels, and knowing how to account for all of those sales channels gets complex, and knowing how to account for inventory and other industry-specific items. That's just a few examples from CPG businesses, but manufacturing has its own issues. Software particularly gets into some revenue recognition complexity sometimes. So having somebody who isn't trying to be a jack of all trades, but will actually know your business, know your industry, the tools that you use, and then do the best possible work within that, and then hand it off to other specialists for things like tax. That's where we see you get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, that's great. And you mentioned a couple times handing information off, sharing it with your tax CPA. We're all a team trying to help our clients be successful. So there does need to be some coordination between the two. Julie, kind of a two-part question. During tax season, what are you looking for from either your client or your client's bookkeeper, if they've hired one, to give you the information that you need to get the taxes done and done well? And what kind of coordination between the two parties have you seen work best?
Yeah, sure. So to answer your question, at face value, we essentially need the basic financials. So we need the profit and loss, the balance sheet, and the general ledger to be able to provide us some insight into some of the transactions at a more detailed level, and sometimes a comparative balance sheet showing us the activity from one year to the next. That's certainly at a baseline of what we would need in order to properly and professionally prepare a tax return. We love getting access to our clients' QuickBooks accounts. It just allows us to pull the information that we need without having to constantly nag the client. Oh, can you give us this? Can you give us the detail on that? We have accounting access to QuickBooks here at Gelt, and a lot of our clients do use QuickBooks as their platform, and granting us the access just gives us that flexibility and that freedom. If we're working late at night one tax season and we realize we need to check on a transaction from several years ago, we could just pull that up, and the client won't know that, we're busy doing that, and they don't need to know until we finally deliver their final product. So that's the great way, or the best way for sure, for us to collaborate with the clients. And sometimes it involves, if the client does have an external bookkeeper, we love also connecting to the bookkeepers. Oftentimes our clients, if we come to them with a bookkeeping question, they kind of throw their hands up and say, speak to my bookkeeper. And we love hopping on a call and interacting with them. And that's great. That gets us the answers that we need right away, again, without interfering with the client. So really us just giving us the flexibility and the freedom to get the information that we need is always ideal.
Yeah, that's great. And Katie, sometimes we encounter a client who is way behind, years behind on their taxes, which can be a problem. And usually if they're behind on their taxes, we find that they're behind on their books. And like we mentioned, that's the foundation. So before we can do the taxes, we need some sort of financials, like Julie mentioned earlier, that they can provide us to do the taxes. If someone is years behind, should they just throw up their hands and say, it's too little too late? What have you guys been able to do to help people catch back up?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say if we have a client who's willing to work with us and is going to respond to requests quickly, no matter how far behind they are, even if it's several years, we can usually get them caught up within about a month. So it's never too late. That being said, I don't recommend leaving this until 1 month before tax deadlines if you are a little bit delayed. Really, I talk to a lot of business owners where it feels like the snowball has been growing for too long, and now it's too big to deal with, and it's easier to just look the other way and put it off for a little bit longer and a little bit longer. But if you work with a bookkeeper, they can often really make it feel much more manageable. And we like to divide things down into a really clear list of tasks so that it's not this grand project that you're trying to kick off, but it's, here's the 10 documents that we need from you. Here's the 5 transactions where, you wrote checks. We need to know what those checks were for, or other transactions like that where we're missing some context. So we really try to kind of abstract away the complexity of going back that far and just make things really simple and straightforward for the client of, if you give us this list of requests that we have, we're going to get it done. And I think that, the hardest part is starting, but once you're working with somebody who will help you break down a big problem into a small and manageable request list like that, things can move pretty quickly.
That's great. So if that's you find yourself way behind, people like Katie can help you out. It's not too late. And go get yourself caught back up. And then Julie will love you as a new client because
They'll log your financials.
you'll
They
clean
didn't you.
and Julie can just hit the ground running, working on your taxes. So
Exactly.
well, thank you both for joining. This has been great. Maybe before I kind of sign us off for this episode, Katie, if you would want to share how people can find you if they need a bookkeeper.
Yeah, absolutely. They can find our website, prometryx.com, or reach out to me personally, Katie@prometryx.com, and we'll be excited to work together.
Awesome. And likewise, if you're already a client of Prometryx and you need a new CPA for your tax filing and strategy, please come check us out at Gelt. Join Gelt.com. You can reach out to Julie or myself. It's our names at joingelt.com. So yeah, this is a great episode. Thank you both. Get yourself a bookkeeper. Don't do it yourself. It's the foundation of your strategy. Try to look for a specialist. We just do taxes. Prometryx just does bookkeeping, and that's important because we want to be the best at what we do. And it really does matter. You could be significantly overpaying the government because you're not running these functions of your business. The parts that feel kind of boring and a little bit like a chore can have tens of thousands of dollars impact on your wallet, which nobody really wants. And it's not too late. If you're behind, we can catch you back up both on the bookkeeping side and on the tax side. So thanks everybody for listening to another episode of Tax Talk Unfiltered. If you have a topic that you want us to discuss, throw it in the comments, send me an email. We look forward to chatting with you next. Thanks everyone.